Good morning, everybody. I'm Vincenzo Calla, president of the Ontario High School Conservative Association, and I'm glad that you are able to join us today. Today, we are glad to have the MPP for Huron Bruce and Ontario's Minister of Government and Consumer Services joining us, the Honourable Lisa Thompson. Lisa was born and raised in the riding of Huron-Bruce and has stayed in the community. Before politics, she was the general manager of Ontario Dairy Goat Cooperative and worked with many other agricultural organizations in her community. She was first elected in 2011 and re-elected in 2014 and 2018. She was appointed Minister of Education in 2018 and was later moved to be the Minister of Government and Consumer Services in 2019, where she has served since. Thank you, Lisa, for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me. It's an honor. I look forward to the conversation we're going to have.
Well, I thank you for joining me. I know it's been a very busy time with COVID and legislature sitting and a bunch of different things going on right now, but I want to thank you for joining us. It's great MPPs and MPs and candidates like yourself that help people learn more about conservative politics and hear what the youth have to say and what you have to say to the youth. So our first segment, we always start off with the question and answer session, where all these questions are asked by our high school members from across Ontario and across Canada. So the first question comes from the OHSCA team, and we ask, what has been your favorite accomplishment as the Minister of Government and Consumer Services?
Well, first of all, representing an amazing riding of Huron-Bruce, I want everyone to know that I'm very proud to be able to say, I grew up, I'll say, I guess I'm still growing up. Every day we learn some more, don't we? But I hail from Huron County. I grew up on a beef farm, and I live in Bruce County now on a farm that's been in my husband's family for 120 years this year. And that's pretty special in its own right. And I have to share with you, one of the proudest things that has carried over into my role as Minister of Government and Consumer Services is that no matter what policy we're considering and or moving through ministerial cabinets and or as legislation through the House, more and more people are ensuring that there's a rural lens placed on legislation coming out of government and consumer services. And I'm very proud about that because a cookie cutter doesn't always fit when it comes to a one-size-fits-all legislation. And we need to be very mindful that when we come forward with policy, regulations, or legislation, we need to keep in mind the diversity of people that we're ultimately there to serve and make sure that their voices are heard so that when we go forward, we have confidence that people will see themselves and understand why a policy or regulation or a piece of legislation will work for them.
Well, exactly. And as we saw, like the governments in the past before the 2018 formation of government with Doug Ford and your Ontario PC cabinet, we saw a lot of the same in the past 14 years. It was different in the beginning, obviously different governments, but then it was more of the same as time went on. And that's why it's important, like you said, not to have a cookie cutter policy, but to have specific policy for every single situation.
Yeah. And or have a combination, a compromise. You know what I mean? At least guarantee that every voice has had an opportunity to be heard through consultation and that they feel that they have had an impact on the end result. You got
Definitely. Definitely. And that it really is something to remember as being a part of government like yourself. You viewed government, obviously you were elected in 2011, so you sat in opposition, then you joined government, you formed government, and you got to use your experiences. And the next question comes from Jaireet in Brampton, and he asks, how has being an MPP changed your outlook on the problems that people in your community face?
Oh my. You know, being an MPP has made me very much aware, cognizant of the fact that people have to work hard to make sure their voice is heard. And as an MPP, I work equally as hard to ensure that voices from my riding and from my stakeholders are heard and considered when making decisions. That is very, very important because, again, uh, being in opposition, as well as having the honor to serve in government now, I find it's very important that we take time to work with members of the opposition as well, so that they understand the legislation that perhaps is being brought forward, and that they can be informed, so that I can trust that whether they agree with me or not, at least they've been informed as to the reasons why we're moving forward with something. And a segue back to one of the things I'm most proud of is one of the first things we did uh, when I took on the portfolio of Minister of Government and Consumer Services is work on legislation known as TRESA, Trust in Real Estate. And I should finish that off. TRESA stands for Trust in Real Estate Services Act. And I had taken time, we consulted, we briefed opposition, and we encouraged advocacy from the sector. And when that piece of legislation went through to be proclaimed by the Lieutenant Governor, she said, "Lisa, it doesn't happen often. How on earth did you get unanimous support for that piece of legislation?" And essentially, it was old-fashioned networking and rolling up the sleeves and making sure that people understood. People, all 123 other MPPs who have the honor of serving at Queen's Park, understood why I was bringing it forward and what it meant for their riding, their constituents, and for the real estate sector. And because we took the time to make sure that people were informed and that there was advocacy from the sector as well, we were able to secure that unanimous support. And that's something I'm very proud about as well. And that is what I've learned as an MPP. You listen to people, you do your research, you inform your colleagues and the members of the opposition why you're coming forward with a particular position, and then you know you've done your job.
Now, that response that you just gave me was really well detailed and really something to remember for people that are in government and people that are in opposition, that government, though you may have a majority government, you still have to represent every single person in Ontario, and you need to be there to represent every single person, every single riding, not just the people that voted for you last time. And that's something really to remember, that people chose you and you have the responsibility to represent everybody and make decisions which is in the best interest of Ontarians.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, when I'm working at home in the riding, I don't have a color or a stripe. I'm a proud person from Huron Bruce, and I'm working on behalf of everyone, and I will meet with everyone as well.
That's exactly it. And that is a great thing to remember as the representative. No matter how much you got in the last vote, your people chose you to be your representative, and that is your job. We decided to hire you. Well, that's what I like to say. The people of the riding hire you for another 4 years. You were elected in 2011, and then you were elected 2014, then 2018 again. So obviously people like you and decide to hire you again.
That's a good analogy. Yes.
So the third question comes from Mackenzie in Burlington, and Mackenzie asks, as an MPP, how do you think that the PC party can keep a majority next year in the next election? It's hard to believe that it's already coming to that, and not lose seats to the Liberals or to other opposition parties that will be running next election.
Well, you know what? I don't know whether I'm telling a secret out of school, so to speak, but we have a premier who wears his heart on his sleeve, and he will go to the wall any given day to make sure that we are doing the best we can based on our values and our principles as progressive conservatives to protect Ontarians and to move our economy forward. And that's how we're going to get reelected again for a second mandate. And again, it's very important that based on caring, like I described the Premier, based on listening and based on actions that have been informed through our listening exercises and connections with constituents, not only in our riding, but across Ontario, will we demonstrate that voices matter and that we're moving forward by being informed and we're staying true to our values as progressive conservatives.
And that's something really that speaks to so many people. I mean, we had, like I mentioned, so many years of a Liberal government, and people wanted change in 2018. And on that election night, I don't remember the exact date, June 6th or 7th or something like that. Yeah, I remember that because it was a PD day, and the day before that, all the teachers refused to believe that Doug Ford would win a majority. But that's besides the point. It was such a great night because people voted for real change and for real government to represent our needs. And as progressive conservatives, like you said, as conservatives, we need to remember that our goal is to serve the people and like Doug Ford has been doing these past couple years. There's been rocky points, as with every government, and not everybody agrees with what happens, but we need to remember that the Liberals and the NDP, they're not going to be they wouldn't form a good government. I mean, we need to remember that Doug Ford is our choice. He is our premier no matter what. And he is the one that will represent our best needs, not the Liberals or the NDP. And we need to remember that when we go to the voting polls next year.
Yeah, and we need a government that is absolutely dedicated to ongoing recovery from this pandemic. We need to be economically minded so that we can move forward, recover in such a way that we can afford those programs that we absolutely need to make sure that we're an inclusive, caring society in the province of Ontario.
Exactly. And the government, your government was doing a great job with the budget pre-COVID-19, a great job moving forward, like really well with balancing the budget from the years of of overspending and fixing Ontario again. And obviously with COVID, it's definitely acceptable for that deficit to go back up. But obviously that was necessary, as with all governments. But we see that the federal government, they didn't spend as wisely as our provincial government has, and we're going to see that in the recovery from COVID-19. Our province will be back on its feet, and like Premier Ford says all the time, we're going to be the economic engine of Ontario, of Canada. And Rudy Cazzetto said that as well when we were talking about a couple months back. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. We're poised to make a difference. And again, we need to recover to get Ontarians back on their feet and also to demonstrate that we have the bandwidth and the spirit and the entrepreneurial expertise and drive to actually do just that, become the economic engine of Canada once again.
Exactly. And that kind of goes into our last question, which comes from the OHSCA team. Well, the last question of the question and answer session. And we ask, how can Ontario PC supporters prepare for the 2022 election while we're waiting the next year and a bit?
Very good. Well, you know what? A key thing to preparation for 2022 is making sure that conservatives are out and about and telling their or sharing. I'm not telling, but sharing is a better word to use. Sharing their opinion as to why this government has done what no other government has done before. We managed and came through the height of a pandemic like never before. And in doing so, we also kept the wheels of government turning. That's another thing we need to be very proud about. Every ministry, every minister, parliamentary assistant, MPP, right up to the premier, have focused on not only fighting the pandemic, but making sure we're progressing our ministerial responsibilities as well. And I think that's so important. And again, we need to be telling our story, but most importantly, challenging people to think about what party will be the best party to help this province recover. How do we get back our our stance as the economic engine of Canada, and so that we can be driving forward that economic benefit right across the province in terms of sustainable, amazing jobs and an economy that is supporting communities from Northern Ontario right down to Southern Ontario and every community in between.
Exactly. And as a party, I think our government, the PC government, is such a great government that's so. I'm sure you can attest to this, as many of our other guests who are in the government have told me before. But your government, and I've called a lot of constituency offices as well, and I hear the same thing a lot. Your government is so close and tight knit that you work in Ontario and do work in the government so well, and you work so well together. And I think that as the next government, hopefully, you can keep on doing that work. And there, like you said about the government functioning as normal, well, not as normal, but continuing to function alongside battling the pandemic, we see so much great hard work from so many MPs and sorry, not MPs, but MPPs like yourself who keep working in your ministry as COVID throws things at you. Like my MPP, the other Lisa McLeod, who's the tourism minister. She's been amazing at working on the tourism profile, even though you can't really do anything right now. You can't travel as much. It's still something to remember that you can still work through it even when there's obstacles thrown at you.
Absolutely, because we need to do so on behalf of Ontarians and our communities that we call home. And to give you another example of how well we do stand together, I'm glad you recognize that. Earlier today, myself and a number of colleagues, ministerial and MPP, were on a press conference with PA Vincent Kuh, and he had a conference. MPP Kuh had a conference to promote his bill, number 299, and that's anti-Asian racism and discrimination and the need for more education. And of course, he was supported by his minister, Minister McLeod, as well as our education minister, Minister Lecce. And the rest of us were there standing side by side with MPP PA Kuh and Vincent Kuh, that is, and demonstrating that it doesn't matter where you call home in Ontario, we need to stand up against anti-Asian discrimination and every other discriminating action that happens in the province of Ontario, because this should be a jurisdiction that everyone should feel comfortable and at home with, and they can be who they can be. Mm-hmm.
Definitely. And that's a great response to sort of go into our next segment on in the a great note to end this segment on. And we really do need to remember that the people of Ontario want what is best, and the government should want what is best as well, as you're seeing with so many people in the government that are doing these types of things, like progressing forward and putting hate behind us and educating people on it. So our next segment is called Advice for the Next Generation. We speak of young conservatives and how they can get more involved. And we do this with every single guest right from our very first interview. Pretty much we've done this. We ask every single guest, what do you think that young high school conservatives can do to get more politically active? And what is one piece of advice you would give them?
Well, I would love to share with everyone listening today that it was in high school when I first proclaimed I was going to run for provincial politics. And I was 14 when I gave my very first balloon out on behalf of the sitting MPP. And, it's all about networking. I was very fortunate to have a family who was actively engaged, both federally and provincially. And so we joke around a little bit in my family that we were genetically predisposed to be engaged. And we wear that as a badge of honor. That said, advice I would take is something as I don't know whether you know it or not, but I've also in January became chair of the Commonwealth Women Parliamentarians Canada region. And a couple of years ago, when I was vice chair, I was invited to write a letter to my 16-year-old self. And growing up in rural Ontario, I was very involved in a program known as 4-H. It is a provincial leadership and skill development program, primarily in small town rural Ontario. But the 4-H's stand for Head, Heart, Health, and Hands. And when I wrote that letter a couple of years ago to my 16-year-old self, I shared a thought that I think is appropriate here as well. Apply your head, your heart, your health, meaning your well-being, and your head, heart, health, and hands to everything you do, especially when it comes to believing and seeing through your interests and your commitments, and be proud of what you do. And that's important. So when I say apply your head, do your research, do your homework, be well prepared. In terms of head, heart, I referred to the premier who wears his heart on his sleeve. You need to care enough to be involved as well. And don't be shy about standing up and saying, I care enough to be engaged as a Conservative in the province of Ontario. It doesn't matter how old you are. And then in terms of health, take care of yourself. That well-being is so important. You have to be good to yourself before you can be good to anyone else. And then hands, get involved. And you get involved by reaching out to your local riding association or to your local member and say, you know what, I'm pretty keen on this. How else can I help you? How else can I be involved as somebody in high school that wants to make a difference? And it's about networking, because when people get to know that you're there for all the right reasons, guess what? They'll be calling upon you. So that's my advice to people in high school. And again, I proclaimed in high school I was going to be running provincially someday. And lo and behold, just a few years later, it happened. But it wasn't without a lot of work, and it wasn't without the support of family and friends and community. So important as well.
And that is a perfect way to say it. I probably couldn't have said it better myself. And I think that analogy of the 4-H's is perfect, because you need to apply everything into it and get involved. I mean, that's what we try to do at OHSCA. We want people to get involved in politics from an early age, so that when we become of voting age, like myself, I'll be of voting age just a month before the next provincial election, if it's in June again. So I'll be able to vote in that election, hopefully. Well, yeah, I will. And I'm looking forward to that. And I feel that from getting involved at an early age I started really paying attention in politics in 2014 when Tim Hudak was running for premier. And during that election, I remember I really started to pay attention when my teacher was showing every video in the class. We were talking about government and all that. And it was what better time to learn about government than during an election? Then next year was the federal election, and there was a bunch going on. So I got to get really involved. And now I'm in the 2018 election. I sort of started to pay attention a lot more. And then now during the next federal election, provincial election, I'll be able to get more involved on top of that. And I think it's important for everybody to get involved and apply everything to it and to set your heart on it.
When I was in high school, I was a scrutineer for municipal elections. And I also was a poll clerk. And when I came home from school, from university, I also was a deputy returning officer as well. And that's nonpartisan, all three, well, less the scrutineer, in terms of the poll clerk and the returning officer, they look for volunteers in that regard. And when you have that role, you set your stripe aside and you do the job for the election, right? And but scrutineering is also interesting, but there's so much volunteer work for your local person that's running as well, and it can be fun. Honestly, there's a lot of laughters and a lot of really good memories. If I may, this sounds crazy, but in 2007, I was involved in supporting our local candidate at the time, and we were out putting signs up. And we were in a truck that had running boards, and the person I was putting signs up with pulled over so much. I stepped off the running board and went right down into a ditch. And as I crawled my way back up, I just said, it's a good thing it wasn't a wet ditch, because I would have been soaked. But, there's fun things like that, and you don't forget them. And I just think it's so important for people of all ages to care enough to be able to talk about social events, current events, and the policies that help shape those current events, because it matters. It doesn't matter how old you are. Your opinion matters. And being involved in politics is another way to share it.
That's really it. And there's so many opportunities to get involved, as we were speaking of in elections, definitely in the roles of working, volunteering with your local candidate, and in the roles of working as working in the elections actual part, like volunteering there. And there are going to be so many opportunities, like next year in the 2022 election here in the province of Ontario, there's going to be so many opportunities to work with your local candidate, whether they're a sitting MPP right now, or if they're just a candidate that wants to run and get a seat in parliament and or legislature, and whenever there's a federal election, or even if you like a municipal candidate. I know there's always going to be municipal elections too, definitely throughout the year. So just get involved a lot and really make those connections that are so important. And we really thank you, Lisa, for joining us today. And we really thank you for talking to us, for answering our questions to our members, and we really thank you for everything and taking your time out of your busy day as minister and as a sitting MPP and during these busy times. And that is it. We hope you enjoyed today's interview. You can look for more videos coming soon. Make sure to follow our Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok accounts at Ontario HSCons for info about our next interview, and for more great content. Make sure to look at our website, ontariohsconservatives.org, to learn more about us, to see our projects, and for more great content. Make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and click the notification bell so you never miss a video. We hope to see you all soon. Thanks for joining us today.